A young woman headed home after a 4th of July party, but she never made it there. From the very first hours of the investigation, detectives began uncovering a series of troubling and downright bizarre clues. But none of them could have imagined the kind of horror they were about to face. And when the full truth finally came out, this case would go down as one of the most chilling in California's history. Megan Barosso was born on March 15, 1981, in the American town of Camarillo, California. When she was just a little kid, her parents split up, and she ended up living with her mom. But her dad stayed in the picture, seeing her regularly. As a child, Megan got into dancing, and it quickly became her absolute passion. During her high school years, her mom lost her job at the local hospital, forcing them to pack up and move to this small town called Templeton, about 3 hours away. It hit Megan hard. She had to leave behind her school and all of her friends. Right after graduating, she decided to head back closer to home. She rented a little apartment in a place called Moore Park, enrolled in the local community college, and landed a job as an assistant in the purchasing department at a clothing manufacturing company. Down the line, Megan planned to transfer to a university, but she hadn't decided what she wanted to study yet. She was excited to be spending time with her friends again. On top of that, her dad had just gotten remarried and had a newborn son, so Megan made it a point to drop by whenever she could. On July 4, 2001, when she was 20, Megan had plans to spend the whole day with her friends. It was Independence Day, and fireworks were set to go off everywhere in celebration. She started by heading over to her friend Lindsay's house, where her family was throwing a barbecue. Everyone was having a great time, and as evening came, they got invited to a beach party in a nearby town. Megan left her car at Lindsay's place, and their friends came by to pick them up. The party itself was pretty chill. They hung out inside for a while, then headed down to the beach to watch the fireworks. A few hours later, they stopped by another friend's house, and around 2 a.m., they got dropped back off at Lindsay's. Lindsay offered to let Megan crash there for the night since the drive back to her place would take a while, but Megan turned it down because she had to be up early for work the next morning. As Megan leaned in to hug Lindsay goodbye, she accidentally knocked her purse and nearly everything spilled out onto the ground. They both crouched down to pick it all up, but in the mix, Megan accidentally grabbed Lindsay's phone. Neither of them noticed and Megan hit the road. Just a few minutes later, Lindsay realized her phone was missing and figured Megan must have grabbed it by accident. She called her own number from the house phone. Megan picked up, turned the car around, came back to drop it off, and then finally headed home for real. Around 4 a.m., a security guard was patrolling one of the streets in Moore Park, keeping an eye on the local business. At some point, he heard these popping sounds coming from a nearby street and figured someone was setting off fireworks over there. He headed that way and soon enough, he spotted an abandoned car right in the middle of the road. The car was sitting partly on the median, engine still running, driver's door wide open. The headlights and wipers were both on, but there was no sign of the driver anywhere. At first, the security guard figured maybe some drunk partier from the holiday had crashed and just taken off. But then he noticed a woman's flip-flop on the asphalt, and the other one was tucked under the driver's seat. That struck him as weird. Would a woman really ditch the scene of an accident without her shoes? He stepped closer, peered inside the car, and saw red stains everywhere. Realizing it was blood, he quickly stepped back and called the police. The officers started examining the car and spotted a few bullet holes. Most were riddled across the windshield and the driver's side window was completely shattered. With all that blood inside the cabin, at least one of those bullets had to have hit the driver. But the cops immediately picked up on something weird. There wasn't a single drop of blood outside the car. If she'd gotten out on her own, blood would have definitely spilled onto the pavement. So, they figured the shooter might have grabbed the woman who was in there and taken her with them. On the left side of the car, the officers noticed some deep scratches, like another vehicle had sideswiped it. Right by the driver's seat was a purse, splattered with blood. There were no documents or ID inside, but tucked underneath the seat where the purse had been sitting, they found a cell phone, also smeared with blood. While the forensics team combed through the car itself, the police scoured the area for any leads, and it didn't take long to find a few shell casings. Experts quickly determined they came from an AK-47 assault rifle. All of this painted a pretty grim picture for the police. According to the investigators, the woman behind the wheel had probably stopped at a traffic light when the perp pulled up next to her. He rammed her car, and she tried to speed away from him, but the guy pulled out an assault rifle and unloaded on her vehicle. It looked like one or more bullets hit her, causing her to lose control and veer onto the median. What happened next was still a total mystery, but the detectives figured the attacker might have grabbed her and hauled her off in his own car. They also realized her wounds probably weren't fatal, given the relatively small amount of blood in the cabin. While investigators were piecing everything together, the cops ran the plates and discovered the car was a rental. They contacted the company. That's when they learned it had been rented by Megan. The detectives called around to every hospital in the area, but she hadn't shown up at any of them. That only made their theory about her being kidnapped even stronger, but they still had zero leads to point them in the right direction. There were no foreign fingerprints in the car, no surveillance cameras on the road, and at the time it all went down, not a single witness drove by. The detectives headed out to speak with Megan's friends and family. Everyone told them the same thing. They had no clue who could have wanted to hurt her. She wasn't the type to get into fights with anyone. She didn't have a boyfriend or any messy exes. And honestly, she'd never made any enemies in her life. The cops also spoke with Lindsay, who filled them in on everything that happened that day. According to her, she and Megan had a great time. Nothing weird or out of the ordinary happened at all. The only thing that really stuck out to her was this guy named John, whose house by the beach was hosting the party. Lindsay knew him, but it was Megan's first time meeting him. Throughout the night, John kept coming up to Lindsay, asking her to introduce him to Megan, but she kept shutting him down. She told him Megan wasn't the kind of girl who'd be into a quick fling, and that was exactly what John was after. The police questioned him, but the guy swore he never left the party, and everyone there backed him up, saying he was at the house until the early morning. So investigators crossed him off their list and shifted focus back to finding Megan. Police brought in search dogs to check the car, but they only followed her scent a few yards before stopping cold, as if it just disappeared right there. That only fueled detectives' theory that some unknown attacker had grabbed Megan, tossed her into his car, and taken off. Even with all that, police still launched a search around the area where the car was found. Officers hit the streets, combed through the nearby mountains, and checked along the banks of a small river. They even brought in helicopters with infrared sensors to scan from above, but none of it turned up a single lead. Meanwhile, the detectives discovered that Megan's car had this device, kind of like a black box, which logged everything that happened with the vehicle. The cops dove into that data and also brought in ballistic experts to map out the trajectories of all the bullets based on the holes in the car. Putting it all together, they came up with a clearer picture of what happened with Megan. Someone sideswiped her car on the driver's side, and she floored the gas pedal to get away. It seemed like the attacker sped ahead and disappeared out of sight because Megan ended up stopping at a traffic light. Maybe she figured the guy was long gone, but apparently he was lying in wait just up ahead, not far from that light. When she pulled to a stop, he started firing at her car. From what the ballistic expert said, those initial shots missed her, so she hit the gas again. But as Megan drove past the shooter, he fired one more time, and that bullet hit her in the stomach. That's when she lost control and veered onto the median. After that, Megan reached for her phone, which was in her purse. That's what the blood traces suggested. But right then, the attacker walked up to her car, and whatever happened next remained a total mystery. As soon as the details of what happened hit the media, this case blew up as one of the biggest topics in the whole county. People were terrified that some unknown psycho was out there blasting cars with an assault rifle, and they were demanding the police catch him immediately. Officers set up roadblocks to question as many drivers as possible. They were hoping to track down at least one person who'd driven through that morning. But all they found were a handful of folks who'd spotted Megan's car abandoned in the middle of the road. All of them just assumed some drunk had crashed and then ditched the scene. So none of these people bothered calling the cops. The detectives also launched a tip hotline, which got flooded with a few hundred calls. Most led straight to dead ends, but pretty soon, the police got this pretty bizarre lead. An anonymous caller tipped them off, saying that on the morning of July 5th, he'd seen some guy stuffing what looked like Megan's body into the trunk of a burgundy sedan. Moreover, it all went down near these mountains with a seriously bad response. Reputation, where bodies turned up way too often. The detectives rushed out to search that spot right away, and they even released information about the burgundy sedan, hoping to find more witnesses. But in the end, it all came up empty. In the days that followed, investigators hit a total wall. They were starting to seriously doubt they'd ever find Megan alive. Still, they didn't let up. They poured everything they had into the case, chasing down every possible lead. With nothing solid to go on, police went back to Megan's closest friends and family, digging deeper to see if any suspect might have been hiding in plain sight. They even brought in handwriting experts to analyze her work documents, looking for any signs that she might have been stressed or anxious in the days leading up to her disappearance. Even with the dead ends piling up, the cops kept pushing forward with the search, and at one point, they stumbled across a human skull up in the mountains. Experts jumped on it and quickly figured out it belonged to a man who'd vanished the year before. A few weeks after Megan went missing, the police put out a $25,000 reward for information, and later, they rolled out a website dedicated to the case, complete with details and a form for submitting tips. A little while later, investigators brought in a well-known profiler named Sharon Hagen. She'd later go on to help create the movie Zodiac and several true crime shows about killers. After digging through every detail of the case, she concluded that the perpetrator most likely had a sexual motive. But the detectives didn't agree with it. They were convinced it was some kind of road rage incident that just spiraled out of control. Sharon, though, was positive the guy had kidnapped Megan to sexually assault her. What's more, she believed this wasn't his first time pulling something like this, and she even dug up a few other cases that could tie back to the same criminal. 2 years before this all went down, a woman named Joanna was just chilling in her bed when a man in a mask, armed with a knife, burst into her room. He claimed he was a cop and ordered her to strip down completely. Then he grabbed her car keys, shoved her into the passenger seat, and drove her to a park where a blanket was already spread out on the grass. There, he assaulted her, and afterward, he just drove the poor woman back home like nothing happened. Then there was another incident just a few days before Megan vanished. A 22-year-old woman named Donna was walking down the street when out of nowhere, a man dressed head to toe in black jumped out from the bushes. Knife in hand, he forced her to toss her phone into the bushes and get into his car. Right there in the vehicle, he sexually assaulted her, then blindfolded her and took her to some house where he continued assaulting her. After he was done, he actually started comforting her. He promised he'd let her go in time for her morning shift at work and even offered her a soda. Eventually, he drove her back to the spot where he'd grabbed her and even helped her find her phone in the bushes. As soon as she was safe, Donna called the cops and gave them a full description of the guy, but they never tracked him down. Still, the detectives weren't quick to link this to Megan's disappearance, so they kept chasing down any fresh leads they could find. But all their efforts just kept hitting dead ends. Things dragged on like that for a few more days, until the case took this totally unexpected twist. On July 26th, a man from a nearby town called the cops and reported that his neighbor had burglarized his house. Officers arrested 31-year-old Vincent Sanchez and found out he was living with 2 roommates, one of whom owned an AK-47, and Sanchez had easy access to it. That said, the police in this town had no idea about Megan's case, so the fact that he had this kind of rare weapon, something most regular folks don't just have lying around, barely raised an eyebrow. They hauled Sanchez off to jail, where he made a call to one of his roommates and asked for a huge favor. Get rid of this bag he tossed into a dumpster near the house. The roommate figured the bag must have had the stolen stuff from the neighbor's place, since the cops still hadn't recovered any of it. So, he fished out the bag and peeked inside. But what he found was nothing like what he expected. It was packed with a bunch of videotapes. Curiosity got the best of him. He wanted to know why Sanchez was so freaked out about the cops fighting these tapes, so he took them home and popped one in. To his absolute horror, the footage showed tied-up women being assaulted by a guy in a ski mask. The man was talking to his victims, and right away, the roommate recognized Sanchez's voice. Some of those videos were even filmed right in the house they shared. The roommate realized Sanchez had been bringing his victims there and he'd had no clue the whole time. Then, he noticed the bag wasn't just tapes. There were several pairs of women's underwear in there, plus a ton of photos of women in explicit poses. He didn't recognize most of them, but one stood out. It was Sanchez's girlfriend, the one he'd been dating for 3 years. In the end, the roommate called the police, and officers showed up to grab the bag. They also searched Sanchez's room, turning up even more photos of women, plus a few pairs of women's underwear and all sorts of female belongings. And that wasn't all. There were knives, a shotgun, handcuffs, and a video camera. So what started out as a simple theft investigation snowballed into something far darker and much bigger. The cops realized that all the women in those videos were Sanchez's victims, and now they had the grim task of figuring out who they were. As the full scale of it sank in, they called in Sharon, the profiler we mentioned earlier. Turns out, she'd already been tracking a serial predator who'd been assaulting women across the city for years, and she'd been studying every one of his victims in detail. There were over 10 of them, and Sharon spotted them instantly on those tapes. She was convinced Sanchez was the guy behind it all, but him wearing a mask in every recording threw a major wrench in the police's work. As she pored over the footage, Sharon caught another creepy red flag. It looked like the attacker had been stalking his victims for a while before striking. He'd casually drop personal details about their lives, like what school they'd gone to, who they were seeing, or where they worked. In trying to connect Sanchez to all these crimes, Sharon thought back to Donna's kidnapping, which went down just a few days before Megan disappeared. Donna had told the cops the guy wasn't wearing any mask at all and gave them a solid description of his looks. Sharon was convinced it was the same creep behind it, so she reached out to Donna and had her come down to the station. There, they set up a lineup with a few men, Sanchez among them. Without a second of hesitation, Donna pointed straight at him and said he was the one who grabbed her. By that point, Sanchez was already staring down a serious prison sentence, but Sharon wasn't done yet. She wanted to prove he was behind every single attack. Then she learned he had access to an AK-47. And since all his crimes revolved around sexual assault, she immediately started to suspect he might also be behind Megan's kidnapping. She tipped off the detectives about this, and they went to Sanchez's place to take a look at the rifle. His roommate, the one who actually owned it, showed it to them, and right away they noticed it was missing the cleaning rod, that thin metal piece that clips under the barrel. The roommate said it had just gone missing, and that's when the investigators realized Sanchez might really be tied to Megan's case. Because a matching cleaning rod had been found near her car, and it even helped prove that her vehicle had been hit with the rounds from an AK-47. From there, the detectives asked the roommate if they could take a look around Sanchez's room. They didn't have a warrant yet, but since one of the housemates gave them permission, they were clear to check it out. Their colleagues had already picked up anything that seemed suspicious, but there was one thing they'd clearly missed. A woman's jacket lying right there on the floor. It matched the one Megan was wearing the night she disappeared. So the officers quickly got a warrant and rushed that jacket straight to the lab. While the investigators waited on those lab results, they sat down with Sanchez's roommates and asked them about his whereabouts on July 4th. According to them, a bunch of friends swung by that evening, and they celebrated Independence Day until around 10 p.m. After that, the guests started heading out, but Sanchez kept knocking back drinks with one of the roommates. Before long, that guy called it a night and went to bed, leaving Sanchez to crash on the living room floor since one of the guests had already taken his room. When the roommate woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom, Sanchez was nowhere to be seen in the living room. 2 hours later, he got up again and Sanchez was still gone. That's when he heard some strange noises coming from outside and looked out the window. To his surprise, there was Sanchez, scrubbing down his pickup truck. It just fell off. Who washes their car at 4 in the morning? The other roommate rolled out of bed around 5:30, and Sanchez was still at it, cleaning his car. Later on, he commented that the truck looked way fresher, especially after he'd shampooed the seats. One roommate's girlfriend noticed a fresh, long scratch on the pickup and asked Sanchez what happened. He brushed it off, saying he'd been caught in traffic and someone had bumped into him. On top of that, detectives talked to Sanchez's best friend, who said that on July 4th, he'd been really down because things with his girlfriend were falling apart. That night, he kept calling her over and over, but she just wouldn't pick up. The detectives then found out that the house of his girlfriend's sister, where a holiday party had been held, was just a stone's throw away from Megan's friend's place. They started piecing together a theory. Sanchez might have headed there, planning to confront his girlfriend. But by the time he showed up, the party was already over. As for the AK-47, they knew he'd thrown around death threats to her family members who tried to talk her out of dating him, so it's possible he grabbed the rifle to scare them. But when he got there, everyone in the house was already asleep. Left alone on that dark, empty street, Sanchez could have spotted Megan saying goodbye to her friend and decided to tail her, leading to the attack. As detectives were piecing everything together, Sanchez, cornered and out of options, finally confessed to assaulting multiple women. With a mountain of evidence stacked against him, he knew there was no escaping it. He admitted to stalking his victims, digging into their personal lives, and even sneaking into their homes to study the layout before abducting them. But when it came to Megan, he flat out refused to admit any involvement. The detectives, though, were almost certain she was dead by this point. And after talking to Sanchez's best friend, they had a hunch about where her body might be. Apparently, Sanchez had once taken his buddy to a canyon and casually mentioned it'd be a great spot to hide bodies. The police rallied volunteers and headed out to search the area. Around 3,000 people pitched in, but the rough terrain made the whole thing a slow grind. Meanwhile, the lab came back with results. They found tiny specks of blood on the jacket from Sanchez's apartment, and DNA analysis confirmed it was Megan's. Using luminol, they also uncovered massive bloodstains in Sanchez's van, but he'd scrubbed it so thoroughly that no DNA could be pulled from it. While they kept hunting for more evidence, the cops brought search dogs to the canyon, and it paid off. One of the dogs zeroed in on a small ravine off the beaten path, and the officers found human remains at the bottom. The body was too decomposed to identify by sight, but they spotted a ring on the victim's hand, identical to the one Megan wore. Later, medical examiners confirmed the victim's identity. It was indeed Megan. They determined she'd been hit by a single bullet that didn't strike any vital organs, but due to the advanced decomposition, they couldn't tell if she'd been sexually assaulted, though they did uncover one chilling detail. She was wearing someone else's underwear. Knowing Sanchez had forced some of his victims to wear underwear he provided, the detectives figured he likely did the same to Megan and probably assaulted her too. At that point, the detectives had enough evidence to take this case to court, but the forensic team dug up even more. While examining the interior of Sanchez's pickup, they found a few specks of glitter. Similar glitter was found in the victim's hair and on her jacket. One of Megan's friends had brought some to the party, and they'd all put it in their hair for fun. The experts studied the glitter under a microscope and found it was pretty rare, hexagonal in shape, with a color that shifted depending on the angle. And here's the kicker. They found an identical piece of glitter on the AK-47 Sanchez had access to. With that, the prosecutor's case got even tighter, linking him directly to the murder. On August 10, Sanchez was hit with 62 charges, including the assaults on 13 other women, and those were just the cases where the police had solid evidence against him. A few months later, on October 4, Sanchez tried to plead guilty to Megan's murder, but the judge rejected it over a technicality. Sanchez wouldn't admit to a specific degree of murder or acknowledge any aggravating factors, which was a big deal since the prosecution was pushing for the death penalty. Those details were critical, so he still had to face a full trial. His lawyer argued there was no way the court could sentence Sanchez to death, claiming the prosecution couldn't prove Megan was alive during any assault, which meant they lacked the extra circumstances needed for a death sentence. Even so, the charges stuck and the trial started in 2003. The defense didn't even try to argue his innocence. They just pushed the idea that Sanchez didn't plan to kill her. But the prosecution's evidence was airtight and the jury wasn't buying it. So eventually they found him guilty of first-degree murder. Sanchez got the death penalty, but just 3 years later, California slapped a moratorium on executions. So, he ended up stuck in prison, serving a life sentence where he's been ever since. He's 55 now, and odds are he'll spend the rest of his days behind bars. In the end, this twisted case was finally solved, but investigators still haven't ruled out the possibility that Sanchez had more victims. Megan was likely the only one he killed, but when it comes to the sexual assaults, that question still hangs in the air to this day.